Hey everyone, you ready for a deep dive?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right, so we're diving into the scariest time machine ever created this week.
Oh, okay. Time travel and horror. Sounds like a recipe for some chills.
Right. I mean, the title alone, right?
Yeah, it definitely sets the bar high, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it does not disappoint.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So the story starts off by introducing us to Mikey.
Mikey.
Yeah, he's like your typical teenager, right? He's got the usual stuff going on, like relationship drama.
Oh, the trials and tribulations of teenage love, right?
Exactly. And of course, the school pressures, like who hasn't been there?
Ugh, yeah. Pop quizzes, homework deadlines, the works. I can still feel the anxiety.
Right. So basically, Mikey's life is like a giant flashing neon sign that says, why time travel seems like a good idea.
Yeah, I can see that. The ultimate escape fantasy. Right. Go back and fix your mistakes. Avoid those awkward moments.
Exactly. And that's where his grandpa comes in. Grandpa Joe.
Okay, Grandpa Joe. What's his story?
So Mikey stumbles upon his grandpa's secret attic, And it turns out Grandpa Joe was a bit of an inventor, mad scientist type, and get this, he actually built a time machine.
Whoa, hold on. He actually built a working time machine.
That's what it seems like, right? And not just any time machine. This thing is like straight out of Grandpa Joe's wildest dreams, complete with all the bells and whistles. And here's the kicker. He left behind a journal filled with all these warnings about the dangers of messing with the past.
Oh, I knew there had to be a catch. You know what they say about those who don't learn from history?
Yeah, but Mikey being Mikey, well...
Doesn't exactly heed those warnings.
Yeah.
Classic Mikey. So what happens next? Does he hop in the time machine?
What do you think? Of course he does. Mikey throws caution to the wind, ignores all of Grandpa Joe's warnings, and sets the date for 1899.
1899, huh? Wow, end of a century. Talk about a pivotal point in history. Why do you think he chose that year?
Right. I mean, talk about a target-rich environment for potential disaster, right? And boom, just like that, he's transported back in time.
I bet. So what's 1899 like? Is it how he pictured it?
Well, let's just say Mikey is a long way from his messy bedroom. He finds himself in the middle of a foggy Victorian city, Cobblestone streets, gas lights, the whole 9 yards. Oh, and did I mention he's wearing his usual jeans and a t-shirt?
Oh, no. Talk about sticking out like a sore thumb, right? He's lucky no one's dragged him off to a museum or something. That's when the real trouble starts, right?
Yeah, because as Mikey's exploring this new world, he gets this awful feeling like he's being watched.
Uh-oh. That's never a good sign. Especially in a strange new time, all alone. What happens? Does he see someone?
He does. And let me tell you, it's the stuff of nightmares.
Okay, now you've got me hooked. Tell me more about this mysterious figure.
Okay, so picture this. There's this thick fog, right? And out of the fog, Mikey sees this tall, shadowy figure. The figure's wearing this long, dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, classic villain attire, right?
Okay, so far so spooky. But what makes this figure so scary?
Well, here's the thing. He doesn't say a word. He just stares at Mikey. And the story describes his eyes as ice, like he's completely devoid of any emotion.
Chills, right. There's something about that kind of silence that's so much more menacing than words, Like you can almost feel the malice radiating off of him.
Totally. And the story describes the figure's movements as predatory, like a wolf stalking its prey.
Okay, now I'm seriously creeped out.
Mm-hmm.
So what does Mikey do? Does he run? Does he scream?
He's frozen, completely paralyzed with fear, like he can't even breathe. And just when things seem their absolute worst, he hears something.
What does he hear?
A voice, like a woman's voice. It's faint, almost like a whisper on the wind,
Ooh, a mysterious voice.
Yeah.
Classic horror trope, right?
Right.
But is the voice there to help Mikey, or is it leading him into even more danger?
Right. Like in a horror story, can you ever really trust anyone or anything? But the voice, it's kind of hard to make out the words, It's almost like it's there 1 minute and gone the next.
Like it was never really there at all.
Yeah, and the weirdest part is, when Mikey looks back, the figure, he's gone too.
Oh, now that's interesting. So the question is, was the figure ever really there, or was it all in Mikey's head?
Right. Was it the stress of the time travel, maybe a side effect of using the machine or something?
Yeah, or was it something else entirely? Some kind of, guardian or harbinger?
Yeah.
The story doesn't really say.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so creepy. Anyway, Mikey's still stuck in 1899, right? And he can't just hang out in a dark alley all night, so he starts walking.
I mean, what else is he going to do? Call an Uber?
Right. So he's wandering through the fog, and he comes across this, old boarding house,
A boarding house, huh? Now, those can be creaky places, even without the time travel element. Yeah. All those people coming and going, all those stories within those walls.
This one is definitely creepy. It's called Mrs. Periwinkle's Boarding House. The name sounds kind of harmless, right?
Mrs. Periwinkle. Yeah, it sounds almost like quaint, doesn't it?
But something about this place just feels off, you know? The windows are dark except for this one flickering gaslight, and there's this weird stillness about it, like it's holding its breath.
Like it's watching him.
Yeah, exactly. And the story describes this like unsettling metallic scent in the air. You know, like the smell of old blood or maybe rust. It sends chills down Mikey's spine. But like he's desperate, right? So he knocks on the door.
I can just imagine what's going through his head. Safety versus the unknown.
Total fight or flight mode, right? And the door creaks open, and there she is, Mrs. Periwinkle.
Okay, what's she like?
Well, she's exactly what you'd expect, I guess. An elderly woman with this long gray hair pulled back in a bun and wearing a high-necked black dress. You know, like straight out of a Victorian novel.
So far, so good. Or should I say so spooky?
But her eyes, that's what really gets Mikey. The story describes them as dark and piercing, like she can see right through him.
Ooh, there's something about those kinds of eyes in a horror story, isn't there? They just make your skin crawl.
And her smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. She seems almost too eager to welcome Mikey inside, you know?
Like she's been expecting him or someone like him.
Right, like he's walking into some kind of trap.
So does he go in?
Well, yeah, I mean, what else is he gonna do? He's freezing, he's lost, and there's that creepy figure lurking out there somewhere in the fog. Plus, there's just something about Mrs. Periwinkle, something that draws him in, even though he's terrified.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, curiosity killed the cat.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you just can't help yourself.
Exactly. So Mikey steps inside, and the door slams shut behind him.
Oh, no. Not the slamming door. That never means anything good.
Right. Talk about bad vibes.
Yeah.
And as Mikey looks around, it only gets worse. The boarding house is exactly as creepy on the inside as it is on the outside.
Oh, I can imagine. What's it like?
Well, the air is thick with the smell of dust and mildew, you know? There are these heavy velvet curtains covering the windows, and they're blocking out most of the light. It's like stepping into a tomb.
Ooh, that sounds oppressive.
And everything is just like covered in shadows. He can hear the sound of his own heart beating in his chest. And that metallic scent, the one from outside, it's here too, but it's even stronger now. Like it's coming from somewhere inside the house.
This is just wrong on so many levels. What does he do?
Well, Mrs. Periwinkle, she shows Mikey up to his room. You know, it's this tiny little attic room with a single bed and a rickety old dresser.
Oh, so hospitable.
And as she's turning to leave, Mikey, he notices something. There's this like small silver locket lying on the pillow.
Ooh, a locket. That's intriguing. What's inside?
Well, Mikey picks it up and he opens it, and inside there's this faded photograph of a young woman.
A young woman. Anyone he recognizes.
He doesn't recognize her, but there's something about her eyes, you know? They're the same as Mrs. Periwinkle's, dark and intense, and Mikey, he can't shake this feeling that he's seen those eyes before. Somewhere.
Ooh, this is getting good. So what does he do with the locket? Does he ask Mrs. Periwinkle about it?
He tries to, but she just gives him this like knowing look and tells him to get some rest.
Knowing look, huh? That's never good.
Right. So Mikey, he's alone in his room and he can't stop thinking about the figure in the fog, the locket, Mrs. Periwinkle. It's all just too weird. He decides he needs some answers.
So what does he do?
Well, he starts poking around the boarding house, you know, like you do when you're in a horror story, and should definitely be minding your own business.
Well, I know that feeling. You know, you shouldn't, but you just can't resist the temptation to look.
Right. Exactly. So Mikey, he finds this like hidden door in the back of a dusty old cupboard.
A secret door. I knew this house had secrets.
Doesn't every creepy old house in a horror story?
True. Where does this secret door lead?
It leads up to the attic, and it's just as you'd imagine an attic in a creepy old boarding house to be. Cobwebs everywhere, covered in dust and filled with these like old trunks and boxes, you know?
Ooh, treasure trove of forgotten memories and maybe some dark secrets. Right? What's in the boxes?
Well, Mikey, he opens one of the trunks, and inside he finds stacks of like old newspapers.
Old newspapers. Okay, that's not as exciting as I was hoping for.
But these aren't just any newspapers. These are from the late 1800s. And they're filled with these stories about like unsolved murders, brutal murders, and they all happen right here in this city.
Unsolved murders, huh? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. What kind of murders?
Well, the details are pretty gruesome, and there's this one chilling detail that connects all the murders. The victims. They were all last seen on foggy nights, and the killer was always described as a tall, shadowy figure wearing a long, dark coat.
Wait a minute. That sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, and as Mikey's reading these articles, his blood runs cold because he realizes that the description of the killer, it matches the figure he saw in the fog.
Oh, no. So not only is Mikey stuck in a creepy boarding house with a creepy landlady, but he's also in the midst of a string of unsolved murders, possibly committed by the creepy figure who's been stalking him. This can't be good.
Mikey's thinking the same thing. He's terrified, and he knows he needs to get out of that house, like right now. He rushes back downstairs to find Mrs. Periwinkle, to ask her about the murders, about the figure, about everything. But when he gets down there, he realizes something's wrong.
What's wrong? Don't tell me she's gone.
She is. The house is empty. He's all alone.
Oh, man, that's classic horror movie stuff right there.
Yeah.
This is where Mikey needs to get out, like, yesterday.
Right. And as if things couldn't get any worse, Mikey, he hears it coming from downstairs in the basement, this slow, rhythmic thumping sound.
A thumping sound, like footsteps.
Yeah, like something heavy is dragging itself across the floor. And that metallic scent, the one that's been following Mikey around.
Don't tell me it's even stronger now.
It's everywhere. Like it's seeped into the walls of the house.
Okay, that's it. I'd be out of there. Mikey needs to channel his inner track star and run.
He does. He doesn't even stop to think. He just runs. He races back up the stairs through the secret door into the attic. And that's when he sees it.
Sees what? The time machine.
Yeah, it's just like he left it, that swirling vortex of light humming in the corner of the attic.
It's almost as if it was waiting for him, don't you think?
Right. Like it knew he'd be back.
And the locket? What about the locket?
It's in his hand. He's clutching it so tightly that the metal is digging into his palm. And Mikey, he doesn't hesitate. He jumps into the time machine, slams his hand down on the control panel.
He's going back to his own time, isn't he?
He has to try, right.
But what about the paradox? What if by going back, he somehow sets in motion the very events that lead to those murders?
That's what's so terrifying about this story, right? It's like a snake eating its own tail. There's no way to know what's cause and what's effect. And as the time machine whirls around Mikey, he closes his eyes, braces himself.
What happens? Does he make it back?
He opens his eyes, and he's back in his grandpa's attic, safe and sound. At least that's what he thinks at first.
We mean at first, what happens?
Well, Mikey, he's pretty shaken up, you know. He's just gone through this horrifying experience. He stumbles out of the time machine and he notices something lying on the floor. It's his grandpa's journal, the one with all the warnings about the time machine. And there's a single page that's been bookmarked.
Oh no, this can't be good.
It gets worse. Mikey reads the page and his blood turns to ice.
Okay, now you have to tell me. What does it say?
The journal entry is short, but it sends chills down Mikey's spine. It says, "The paradox is complete. The killer is him."
Him. Mikey. He's the killer from those newspaper articles.
The story doesn't explicitly say it, but Mikey, he puts it all together. The figure in the fog, the murders, the locket, the journal entry, it all points to him. He's destined to become the killer.
Oh, wow. That is seriously messed up. So what does Mikey do with this information? Does he try to change his fate? Does he destroy the time machine?
That's what makes the story so terrifying, right? It leaves you with more questions than answers, but it makes you think, doesn't it? About the choices we make, the paths we take, and the monsters we might become.
It's like looking into a dark mirror, isn't it? Seeing a version of ourselves we never want to become. And that's a chilling thought to end on.
For sure. Well, folks, that was the scariest time machine ever created. A chilling tale about the dangers of messing with time, the consequences of our actions, and the monsters that might be lurking within us all. Sleep well.